In your recent report on the human rights situation, you focused on genocide, which you describe as a kind of a business model for some state actors, but also for some companies, including universities. Could you briefly summarize your findings in that?
Absolutely. Look, I've spent 1 year and a half documenting the conduct of the Israeli army supported by Israeli leaders in Gaza and the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory. And last year, I produced 2 reports explaining why Israel was committing acts of genocide. I'm no longer the only one to say that. But this year, I understood finally that the genocide in Gaza has not been stopped, not just for ideological reasons, for Israel's unrelinquished territorial ambitions over what remains of the occupied Palestinian territory that he wants to empty of Palestinians, which is horrible, but it's also because it's profitable. Genocide is a profitable endeavor. If you look at the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, it has risen of 170%, amassing $220 billion, $70 billion only in the last month. Why?
But you mentioned also international companies.
But absolutely, because this is not... I mean, the Israeli economy has been in free fall, so how it's possible that the stock exchange went up? Because most of the businesses are not just Israelis. Of course, there are Israeli arms manufacturers, but there are also international, American, European arms manufacturers, including Italians. And there are companies who have provided the means, including banks and the financial sector, who has provided the means for Israel to continue to escalate its military violence against Gaza. And universities have lent legitimacy and even money from the European Union. The EU Horizon program has helped to transfer funds through partnership or directly to Israeli universities who are not neutral, who are not impartial. I mean, Israeli scholars say that Israeli universities have been part and parcel of the underpinning ideology of apartheid, perpetual occupation, and genocide.
But you have been harshly criticized time and again by Israeli state officials. The Trump administration even called for your removal as a rapporteur. How do you deal with these allegations that you were biased and even anti-Semitic?
I don't.
You don't bother?
No.
But you like to provoke on social media.
No, I don't provoke. I mean, I'm a special rapporteur. I look at the facts and the legal qualifications, and I have the quality of being honest and transparent. Of course, I do not expect the states, which I'm exposing for committing war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide, and the US is totally with and behind Israel to throw cotillon at me. I understand they are upset, but they need to face consequences. And the question is why the European Union, instead of applying international law, is following as a vassal the diktat of the United States.
We'll come to that, but do you also see a kind of terrorism-fueled economy in the Palestinian territories made by Palestinian groups against their own people, like Hamas or other groups?
Terrorism-fueled economy? No.
No.
I don't. No, there is no. Look, there is no economy for the Palestinians to start with. There might be acts of terror, no question about that,
there are
and
human
there are
rights
crimes.
Violations.
But not versus the... Of course, there are human rights violations. I mean, when I've investigated the detention practices against the Palestinians, I've investigated primarily Israel, but also Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. I've said, look at how many layers of oppression Palestinians face. But the main problem remains Israel as an unlawful occupier, which is using occupation to annex land and to forcibly displace the Palestinians.
Now to Europe. In your reports, you propose concrete instruments how to deal with the economic-driven genocide, for example, an arms embargo, an economic embargo. The European Commission presented its review of the EU-Israel Association Agreement last month, and it stated that there are indications that Israel was, in fact, in breach of its human rights. But now the foreign ministers will discuss it next week. Do you see any political will to tackle this issue from EU?
First of all, the EU-Israel Association Agreement is a disgrace for Europe. Because when European Union entered that agreement, Israel was already committing war crimes, because colonies after colonies after colonies. Already in the 1990s, when the peace process started, there were 80 colonies. Now there are 300. So colonies are a war crime. And Israel was forcibly displacing the Palestinians and using arrested detention, including of children, as a way to repress the Palestinians. And this is also another crime punished under the Rome Statute. So that agreement has been problematic from the very beginning. However, now it's appalling. I mean, it is to be rescinded. Otherwise, we are further normalizing the impunity, but also making European citizens morally and also materially participating in an unlawful endeavor.
But what could European citizens do against it? What could Slovenian citizens do against it?
Well, first of all, I don't want to put the responsibility on the citizens, because there are so many people in these countries and in the rest of Europe and abroad which are morally broken, psychologically broken from what they are seeing every day, and this is creating a sense of psychological overwhelming and powerlessness. So while individuals can join organizations that, for example, point at companies who are or businesses who are connected to the unlawfulness of the occupation, and they can look at the companies they used to go on holiday, because Booking.com and Airbnb have still dealing in the occupations. They are profiting from the properties on stolen land, and also where they put their money, which is their insurer, and so on and so forth. Primary obligation is with states. States have an obligation not to recognize the legal consequences of an unlawful occupation, all the more as it's committing genocide and presumably or plausibly genocide. And so member states have to impose the sanctions. Member states have to stop selling, transferring and buying weapons and other security services from Israel. Because all these technologies and weapons, radars and drones and other military equipment have been battle tested. What does it mean? Tested on the body and soul of the Palestinians as individual and as a collective, including children. 18,000 children have been killed in 15 months.
My last question, when it comes to the international rule of law, you have often spoken out in favor of the International Criminal Court, but have also been very critical of it. In what respect?
Well, first of all, I do respect and defend an international justice system made of the International Court of Justice and International Criminal Court, even if I do not always agree with their stance.
Because they're slow.
No, but also because, for example, when it comes to the genocide that happened in this region. I don't think that acts of genocide were committed only in Srebrenica. But again, I do respect the role of the court in also... today we are facing a settler colonial genocide, the first genocide of this nature to be adjudicated by an international tribunal, so there is a huge pressure on the court. However, I've been critical, for example, of the International Criminal Court, which waited until October 2023 to really start investigating, while the colonization of what remains of Palestine and the collective punishment imposed of Gaza through the closure and 17 years of blockades should have investigated since the beginning.
The Slovenian ICC judge Betty Hochler is under American sanctions because she's doing her job. Does the EU, because she's also a European citizen, and Slovenia do enough to protect her?
Well, I think that it's shameful that the European Union has not taken a most robust stance in defense of the judge, to whom goes my solidarity, because there are other European judges, like the French judge. Why only the Slovenian was that? And this is, you know, the logic behind it. I always hit the one that is... I see as the weaker element of the chain. First of all, Slovenia is not weak at all, and Slovenia is the country which has been the most outspoken. So I always say power doesn't go with size, and certainly not courage. So again, the European Union is really dragging European values down the drain. This must stop.